Welcome, Andrew Dodge. I am so excited to have you here today. So, Andrew is the founder of the podcast Unforbidden Truth. And I came across Andrew on social media and I spotted his podcast and I realized that he talks with some of the most dangerous and violent criminals who are incarcerated. And it caught my eye because as a forensic psychologist, I'm like, wait, isn't that my job? And I'm like, well, I want to get to know Andrew. Why is he interested in talking with these inmates who are currently incarcerated? Many of them who have been convicted for serious crimes, murder, serial killers. So Andrew and I have had a few conversations and he's let me know he's been in contact with serial killers across the United States. And he has done many, many interviews. And so he gets to hear all the intimate details about these crimes and personally get to know some of them. And so I found I wanted to interview you here today to just find out more about where your passion came from and what your mission is in uncovering the truths about these individuals. And maybe we have some things in common because while I have a specific purpose when I interview defendants in custody for very specific reasons, like court-ordered psychological assessments, sentencing recommendations, or things like that, I'm just maybe I did it all wrong. I didn't even need to go get a doctorate degree to go do this. You're doing it. You're killing it. You started your own podcast. So I'd love to hear more about you.
Yeah, well, thank you for having me on today. Like you said, I host Unforbidden Truth, and I also host another podcast, which I just launched less than a month ago called Reflections from Within the Mind of a Juvenile Offender. And we can talk about that in a little bit if you want. But basically how I got started, my dad is a retired retired cop and detective, and my late stepmom was a 911 dispatcher. So I've always had crime, I guess, involved in my family, so to say. My Like I said, my dad was a homicide detective. He was a detective. He worked, child cases, child rape cases, so on and so forth. So ever since I was young, I've been interested in true crime ever since I could read. Really, I've just been interested in serial homicide. Really, ever since I was young. And when I was about 19 or 20, I wrote to a guy by the name of Philip Jablonski, Charles Manson, and Roy Norris, and I didn't think that they would ever write back. So I was like, I'm just going to try to write these people and see what happens. And sure enough, one letter came, two letter came, and then it's like hundreds of letters came after that. So I pretty much just started writing and corresponding with prisoners. I visited California's death row before the moratorium was set into place. And I visited Tennessee's death row, Texas death row. I visited a few inmates here in Washington State. So it basically just started with like a hobby turned business, I guess you can say. And here we are today, almost 15 years later. I started this in 2010 when I was 19, and I'm 33 now. So yeah, it's been a wild run for sure.
Did Charles Manson ever write back?
Just one time he did, and I don't even think it was him, to be honest. I think it was one of his quote unquote X-Men. I don't know if you know what that is, but he had so much mail, he would hand it out to other inmates that he was friends with. And I believe the person that wrote me back was Michael Markusev, and I used to write him actually. He's the guy who killed Ennis Cosby, Bill Cosby's son. So I'm pretty sure I've since got rid of it. I sold it years and years ago, but it was like almost identical to his handwriting. So I'm pretty sure Bill Cosby's son's murderer wrote me back under the name of Charles Manson, which I think is kind of funny.
Wow, that's very interesting. Yeah. Let's talk about the amount of mail that these inmates receive. And I know recently we talked about on another show, Wade Wilson and this infatuation from women sending fan mail, marriage proposals. I don't get any fan mail. Like, you know, like, but these serial killers, these violent men are getting thousands of letters from women. Like, what am I doing wrong? I mean, what kind of message is that sending to society? Like, where our values are, that we're, um, these fantasies, right? So everyone's trying to make contact with them or glorify them or have this relationship with them. Um, do you find that disturbing? The This fascination. So it's different maybe than what you and I are doing, like in an educational manner. But um, when you have these conversations with them, what is their experience with receiving all that attention?
Well, I talked to quite a few people that get a lot of mail, and for the most part, believe it or not, a lot of them don't care. Like a lot of them will say, when I first was arrested, yeah, I enjoyed the attention, I enjoyed the mail and everything, but now I just want to be left alone. I want to do my time, and I just don't want to be in the media, or I don't want to be in the spotlight, because the more mail you get, the more attention you get, the more attention you get from guards, which is a bad thing for them. Like the more you get picked on, or you get moved, or you get excluded from, like, say, yard or phone calls or whatever. I've noticed that happens a lot with more high profile inmates, such as Todd Colehep. Like, I don't know if you've listened to my 4-part interview with Todd Colehep, but when I did an interview with him, he was getting a lot of attention after the interview. And there was a few people that called in the prison, was like, hey, this guy did an interview on his cell phone, go toss his cell. So I guess they froze his like account to where he couldn't get commissary or media or anything like that. They took his phone calls away. They took his visits away, which I don't think he was getting visits at the time anyway. But somebody like him, when he was first arrested, I remember him telling me he was getting a lot of mail, and he was getting a lot of these groupies like you were talking about. There was a lot of BDSM type of women that were writing him, and he would call himself Daddy Todd to a lot of these younger women, which I think is fascinating in itself. Hybristophilia is very fascinating to me. That's another topic in itself we could talk about one day. But yeah, I think it's super interesting when these people have groupies, and it's both men and females. I'd say more females than males have more groupies, because there are a lot of pretty women that are in prison that have done horrible things, and I guess some guys and gals are attracted to that for whatever reason it may be.
Yeah, we did a podcast on hybristophilia, which is a paraphilia, and it's not talked about a lot, but it came up recently with the Wade Wilson case because of, through social media and TikTok, so many women were, the comments they were making were, well, uh, I mean, they were making fan pages and saying, I would F them anyways, or it just crossed a whole line to the point of, we didn't care what he's done to these women. They were saying I'd let him strangle me, and all this stuff on social media. So it was thousands. And so we did a show on that, sort of addressing some of the pathology behind the people who are drawn towards that. And you're right, it's a lot of women out there. So ladies, might want to get yourself checked if that's the only way you feel powerful or special. You got to, like, pair yourself with someone like that to get attention. There's a whole psychology behind that, and it isn't healthy.
Yeah, yeah, it definitely is.
I'd love to hear about your intentions behind your podcasts and your mission in having these discussions. What do you want the world to know? Like, you've been working so hard. I know, because I've talked to you and you're so busy. I've been trying to get this interview. So you've spent a lot of time on this, right? And what is the passion that motivates you every day to keep doing this? What do you love about it?
Sorry, it just froze up again. I don't know why it's freezing up, but yeah. So you asked why, like, what I'm trying to get out of all of this, pretty much. Okay, so yeah, like I said, my dad was a retired cop and detective, and my stepmom was a 911 dispatcher, and I've been visiting prisoners and talking with them since 2010, right? And there's a lot of people that have asked me, what it's like interviewing a prisoner, what it's like being face to face with them, and I figured, after talking about it for so many years now, I just figured I would start a podcast and share with the public, what I do with my interviews and everything like that. So I think I started podcasting back in like 2017. I was with another man, Chris Duet. We had another podcast which is now defunct, and we started interviewing prisoners together because he was writing prisoners. I was writing prisoners, and he's like, "Do you want to start a podcast and share our experiences with the public?" And I'm like, "Yeah, actually, I've been wanting to do that for like a year now." So it's kind of crazy that you reached out to me and wanted to do that. So fast forward to 2020, I I basically jumped ship on that other podcast because I didn't like how it was going, and then I started my new podcast, which is Unforbidden Truth, and I basically just want to share my experiences with the public. My interviews with them because, like I said, there's so many people asking me what it's like to visit death row, what's it like to talk to serial killers, mass murderers, spree killers, child killers, whatever, name it. So I just basically started the podcast to share my experiences with the public, and also this second podcast that I have is to interact with the public with a, I guess, infamous mass murderer, James Wiley. So long story short, that's why I started my podcast, and to basically just share my experiences with the public.
Yeah. And through that, you're able to share their experiences as uh, being a defendant, going through the trial process, being convicted, incarcerated, being on death row. Like, you know, who are they? I think a lot of people become overly fascinated with these criminals, if you want to call, put them in that category. They're convicted, that they're so, so, so different from you and I. And I would like to know your thoughts on that because I want to hear what you have to say.
On how they're different between you and I.
Yeah. Or are they the same?
Well, believe it or not, I've met a lot of inmates that I have a lot of similarities with and differences with. Like, for instance, there's a spree killer here in Washington named Isaac Zamora. I believe he killed 6 people, a sheriff's deputy, and 5 other people. He had a schizophrenic break. He thought that, well, at the time, he had demons telling him to kill people because they were actual demons, and if they didn't kill them, his family would die, so on and so forth. So I met him, and his family actually brought me to his house where he grew up, and I got to like learn about his upbringing, and basically we hung out at a lot of the same places. He lived like 30, 40 minutes away from me, right? So that was the first person that I actually was like, wow, I have so many different similarities with. Like, we hung out at the same place, we eat the same food, we listen to the same music, we watch the same TV shows. And it's not, I don't always talk about their crimes with them. It's like, what did you do growing up? What's the weather like? What are you doing in prison nowadays? So on and so forth. And it's pretty crazy how many similarities I share with a lot of these offenders. And it just is like, does that mean I'm going to become a serial killer one day? you know, uh, but I mean, for the most part, I do have a lot of differences between them. Like, obviously, I'm not like a sexual deviant or anything like that. When it comes down to talking about their crimes and their case with them, I'm just like, wow, maybe I don't have as much in common with this person as I thought I did. And it's just a case by case basis, really. I mean, there's so many of them that I have so much in common with, and there's some that I'm just like, I have nothing in common with you, but it's interesting to speak to them. I mean, especially the ones that will actually openly speak about their crimes, which is pretty rare nowadays, it seems. I'm sure you've come to find that out as well with your profession. A whole lot of them want to say that they're innocent with DNA, eyewitnesses, and the whole shebang, really.
Yeah. And, you know, I think sometimes attorneys will later tell them, don't do these interviews or don't talk because, right, if they're trying to appeal the case or, the Innocence Project or a lot of other reasons that their legal team wouldn't want them talking to you. And so tell me about some times you've been intercepted from interviews. They don't want you to interview these people. Right? Because a lot of it's just very revealing once they interview with you, and they might be talking about, reveal a lot of information about a crime or other crimes they weren't charged for. I think you mentioned that during one interview, somebody disclosed specific details of prior crimes in a cold case, and the police listened to your podcast. Tell me about that.
Yeah, so a man by the name of Cecil Davis, he's dead now. I believe he passed away in like 2022 or 2023. But I interviewed him 3 separate times. The first 2 times, the audio was too terrible to use. The third time, it was good. But so I interviewed him about his crimes. He talked about everything like everybody else does. Then at the very end, I'm like, is there anything that you're responsible for that you haven't been convicted of or anything like that? Then at first, he denies killing a woman by the name of Miss Georgia. And then he says, well, between you and I, um, he basically talks about he killed her, he killed other people in a retirement home, but if this is just between you and me, so if the police come and talk to me, I'm just going to say I have nothing. I don't know what you're talking about or something like that on a recorded prison phone, right? Uh, so uh, the victim's granddaughter gets a hold of me like a year and a half later and was like, I'm sure you're not going to believe me, but I'm the granddaughter of Georgia Aaron's Calkins. And I'm like, yeah, okay. Like I get at least once a month a random message like that, like I'm the family member of so and so and whatever, whatever. And then I actually did a little bit of research on her and I'm like, this is actually the granddaughter. And she told me that she got a hold of the Tacoma Police Department, which is in Tacoma, Washington. And she sent the interview to them and was like, can you guys listen to this? And then they're like, yeah. At first, they kind of brushed it off. And then I guess the cold case detectives listened to it, I guess 4 or 5 different times. And then I guess they called the captain and chief of police and everything in there and was like, can you like listen to this, listen to this? And I guess they listened to it. Between his DNA that was on file, there was partial DNA that was left at the crime scene and his partial confession. They were able to close the case. It was the cold case happened in 19, 1993 or 1992. I'm forgetting the date right now, but it was 29 years later that it was solved through one of my interviews and then partial DNA, which was on file. And what's crazy is like 2 days before the inmate passed away, he kept blowing up my phone, and I was like, I don't want to take his call because he's always asking me for money or to help his friend out in prison or this or that. And I kick myself every day not answering the call because just so I was just so fascinated at what he had to say. Because if I would have known he was dying, I would have picked up the phone. But yeah, they closed that cold case after my interview and partial DNA was on file, and they were able to close that case and label him the murderer, which now makes him a serial killer with 3 victims over with a cooling off period. So it's kind of cool that my podcast helped solve a cold case. I would have never thought in a million years that that would happen, and that's, I guess, another reason why I do what I do, because you never know what's going to happen with these interviews.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's incredible. And, here's the thing, when people get talking, and I talk to people, right? So after you talk to them long enough and you build some trust and rapport, they eventually disclose more information about themselves, just as we do naturally if we just kept talking for hours and hours, right? I might find myself telling you things I didn't intend on sharing, right? As the relationship unfolds. But I think you've created this space where they feel comfortable talking to you, and you've had multiple conversations. And like you said, if they're feeling lonely and or just talking, this information, reveals itself, and that's that's a good thing that can come out.
It's taken me sometimes like almost 10 years to build a rapport with somebody. Like, for instance, Richard Allen Davis, the polyclass killer, the three strikes killer. It took me about 10 years to gain his trust for him to do an interview with me. And we just did that like a week and a half, 2 weeks ago. And I got like a 3 hour interview out of him, which was amazing to say the least. He finally gave his MO as to why he killed polyclass after all these years, which I think is super interesting and fascinating. And he told me last night, actually, we were on the phone, and he's like, you're one of the only people you're the only person that I trust in my entire life. And I talk to a lot of people, and I consider you one of my good friends, blah, blah, blah. And I'm just like, oh, well, thank you. We've been talking a long time. So I sure hope you do trust me.
Wow, that's a lot of power. Who knew Andrew would have the most serial killer friends?
Right, right. Yeah, I get more phone
Like,
calls from serial killers than I do my family and friends, which is kind of funny.
wow. Yeah. Well, so you get a lot of phone calls from these, most of them are men, but have you ever had females that like cross the line with their communication with you? Because you have a lot of phone calls, and uh are, what is your experience with the female population? Are they trying to flirt with you or try to have you help them?
Yeah, both really. They try to flirt with me and try to get me to help them. They'll be like, "Oh, a woman has a lot of needs in prison. Can you help me out with this and this? And I'll do an interview with you." And I'm like, "No, I'm okay. Like, if you want to do an interview to get your story out there, that's cool and all, but I'm not going to pay you. I don't pay for interviews." And a lot of them do try to flirt with me to try to get things. Um, honestly, I try to stay away from female offenders just because there's so much drama in female prisons, as you can imagine. I mean, women have nothing better else to do except to plot and think in a female prison. And I've seen it. I've known people who have dated female prisoners, and then when they break up, it's like all hell breaks loose, and they have people harassing them, threatening to kill their family, and this and that. And it's just a big no-no for me. But I only interview female offenders if somebody brings me one. Like, for instance, I've interviewed female offenders in the past, and they'll be like, "Oh, I found three new girls for you to interview." And I usually tell the offender beforehand, like, let them know I can't pay them money. This is strictly like professional. Like, I'm not gonna date them or come visit them or whatever. It's just a one-time deal, one and done. And that's that, really. I mean, but a lot of them do try to flirt with me to try to manipulate me into doing things. But I've been doing this so long that I can see through somebody right away. It is what it is, really, at this point.
That's funny that you have that experience. Yeah. So you definitely have to have clear boundaries with these folks because they want what they want. They're going to get it from someone, somewhere or the other. I mean, they might as well test everyone out.
Right, right. Yeah, definitely. I always set up boundaries. The very first phone call, I'm like, okay, I can talk to you maybe once or twice a week. If it's not California, if it's California, we can talk however long we want to, because phone calls are free, as you know, in California. I think one other state is free, but yeah, I like to set up boundaries right away. Like, for instance, there's a serial killer not that long ago where I didn't set up boundaries with him, and he was calling me every single day. In Michigan is like $2 to $3 a phone call, and I finally told him, like, look, we can talk once a week, but I talk to over 200 prisoners a month, so it gets kind of expensive for me to talk to the same person over and over and over. And he just wants to talk about, he's schizophrenic, so he just wants to talk about random delusions that he has and tell me about how there's, you know, just crazy shit going on in the world. I'm like, okay, well, we can talk once a week, but besides that, we can ride on JPay and this and that. But yeah, boundaries is a big thing with me because I work a 9 to 5 and I do the podcasts. So I need to make sure my time is spent wisely and not wasted on the phone like hours a day with inmates, which it is, but it's not really wasted. It's more or less, getting new interviews and maintaining rapport with new prisoners and so on and so forth.
200 interviews a month is a
Well,
lot.
no, not 200
How are
interviews
you?
a month, 200 inmates a month I talk to.
You talk to 200 inmates a month.
Well, yeah. So
Is that
on
right?
Securus, JPay, Connect Network, and the phone, I mean, sometimes I'll talk to like one inmate maybe once a month or every other month. But yeah, around 200 inmates a month that I talk to and keep in touch with, really.
Okay, yeah. I don't keep in touch with very many people from, so that's a lot. You know, to maintain the bandwidth, uh, the time and emotional energy to even have conversations with that many people, that is a lot.
Yeah, it definitely is. And there's some inmates where I'll just pass messages through another inmate too. There's like maybe 10 or so inmates where I'll be like, hey, can you tell so and so to call me on this day? Or can you tell so and so to email me on this day? Or can you tell so and so to find me new interviews? And they will, like. So it's not like I talk to the 200 like every day or every week, but it's like maybe one I talk to one maybe one a month, and this guy every other month, and so on and so forth. But if you saw my email list on Securus and JPay, you'd be like, holy crap, I probably have like 500 inmates on JPay alone.
Wow. Yeah, I love what you said about boundaries. It's obviously the most important thing to protect yourself, and having that initial conversation where you are very clear on what you'll do or not do, or what your role is, or what you're doing. And so I can't talk about boundaries enough. In my role as a female, I make it very clear. I also make it clear what I will do if you attempt to cross that boundary. And of course, my role is a little different, but I do, there are consequences, or it goes into my report. And so it is kind of funny if they ask me out, like somebody murdered someone, and then I evaluate them and I'm like, any other questions? And then this has happened. If at the end they'll say, yeah, can I get your number? That's just, it's always ridiculous. Like, I'm like, thanks for trying. Goodbye. Like, and they're like, you're going to come back and see me? And I said, absolutely not. This is a full-time interview. It's a report to the court. Like, uh,
That's funny.
yeah. And, you know, people can try. It's a game. People are always fishing to see who they can compromise or see what they can get. Right. Um,
Right.
so, yeah. So I'd love to hear about your new podcast, your new project, and, you know, information about, because this is a juvenile offender. Is that right?
Right, right. Yeah, James Wiley, in 1990, he was 15 years old, and he had killed his stepmother and his 3 brothers. And this podcast is called Reflections from Within the Mind of a Juvenile Offender. And it's about what it exactly sounds like. It's reflections from James Wiley and myself, then versus now. Like currently we're on his childhood right now, which is going to be about like 4 to 8 episodes. And we're also, we're doing a whole lot of things really. We're doing like analysis on infamous juvenile cases. He's he likes to write letters to people. Like he's done a letter to like Donald Trump, Kamala Harris, Tyreek Hill, um, so many different other people. We're basically just trying to raise awareness on juvenile cases and juvenile offenders because he's doing life without the possibility of parole, which I think is still super interesting that he hasn't been resentenced yet. But he is in Wyoming, which is a state that's probably going to be one of the very last ones to change the juvenile laws. But yeah, Reflections from Within. We have about 5 episodes out right now, and we record 2 to 3 times a week, and we're just basically blowing through the childhood right now, and after that, we're just going to. It's like we're all over really with what we're going to be talking about. Like I said, we're going to be talking about cases like Sandy Hook, Columbine, so on and so forth. He's going to be giving analysis on different juvenile cases and um, so on and so forth. And we actually talked about having you on sometime to do like a anywhere from like a 1 to 3 hour interview over the course of a few sessions to do a forensic interview with him, which he was super excited about. Um,
Oh, wow.
so yeah, we're basically just talking about his life then versus now, and just basically talking about juvenile justice and trying to raise awareness for it.
Yeah, absolutely. I see defendants in custody in juvenile hall, and I see them for different reasons as a court appointed evaluator. Uh, yeah, even murder. So, my last client, it was a murder. It was a juvenile, but I testified about transferring to another facility, whether he should or shouldn't. I testified that he should not because he had he was in the middle of a psychotic break and he had finally began to be stabilized on his medications. And if you know anything about it, trying to find the right medication, it can take 7 trials of medication, failed attempts, and your environment is very important. And if you can quickly decompensate or come unraveled, and it can wreak havoc on the whole unit. So once you get someone stabilized, you don't want to move them out too quickly. You need to protect the environment. So I have another juvenile sex offender case um, right now, and it will be a matter of where this person hasn't been sentenced, but whether they should be transferred to adult court or not, or to, which means is so that's these are really important factors to look at. And in this one case, the file I got was like about 3 feet high. But well, I look at certain things, you know, factors around that, which are, it's a deep discussion, right? As far as their mental health, their mental state, treatment recommendations, medication, um, all of these things. And so it would be interesting to talk with someone from the remote past who was a juvenile in the 90s and the system then. Of course, it varies from state and jurisdiction to like what each state, how they proceed, right, with juvenile offenders. It's quite interesting. I've been communicating with people from India, someone from South Africa the other day, uh, Australia, the UK. And so I'm learning things, of course, across the states, how it is different. And that, so that is very important. Like that can have an impact of whether someone gets life in prison or the death penalty, or um, just as a side example, a case in India at the time of the crime, there was no laws for juvenile sexual offenders. So the person is free. No, anyway, all those things I think a lot of people in society aren't thinking about. But yeah, it's important. So I love that you're having these deep dive conversations. And I always ask people like, what could we learn from your experience? Or how can we do better as the system? Like, where did we get it wrong? Or, you know, I like to learn new things every day. And how can we do better? How can I do better in my role? Right.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, there's a lot we can learn from prisoners too. I mean, people think that they're just monsters and we can't really learn anything from them and just execute them or house them in prison and just lock them up and throw away the key. But there's so much we can learn from them. And like Mindhunter, that program, they learned so much from different serial killers, and they had Ted Bundy help and catch the Green River Killer, which I think is fascinating in itself. And there's so much that we can learn from these offenders. It's just, you got to put your, I guess, biased thinking cap off and just basically ask unbiased questions, really, as that's what I do, really. There's so much I've learned from different offenders, and just like, wow, who would have thought, that this person, like, you would learn this from this person or that from that person. And it's crazy, really. So many similarities and differences that they have in common or don't have in common. And, people always ask me, like, what's the number one thing that you learn from these serial killers or whatever? And I'm like, well, mental health and childhood and drugs and alcohol is like the number one common denominator with all of them, and that's it's pretty interesting to me, really.
I love education, and I've taught in the jail, and I've taught in psychiatric facilities, and uh, yeah, there's so much that people don't know, um, even just drug use alone. And probably the saddest cases I've ever seen are cases where, um, in a drug induced psychosis, they commit a horrific crime and changes the trajectory of their life forever. And I have the family bawling their eyes out, talking to me, like the interviews. And drug use, if I had any advice for people, uh, I haven't, I just hear all the horror stories of drug use and abuse. And it's typically the cases I see most involve drug use. Or in all the clients I see, it is a common denominator. So it is a problem. Um, and, um, and you can't go back in time to undo it. So am I've educated my boys, my family, anyone I can, about the side effects, consequences of potentially getting involved in drugs and alcohol. People underestimate alcohol or even marijuana, but look, no, I'll tell you all the stories. Okay. Uh, I could go on and on about that, but I don't see anything positive coming from it.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think it takes a lot for somebody to get involved with drugs too, like heavy drugs like heroin, meth, etc. Like nobody just wakes up one day and like, I want to stick a needle in my arm, or I want to smoke crack or something like that. And it's sad for people that do, because I know that some people just feel like they have nothing better else to do in life other than just to cope by using drugs. But I mean, mental health is out there for a reason, but it's not always easy to get in to see a mental health provider at the same time too.
Yeah. I love some of those programs. Like we locally have the Hope van. So it's a mental health van. It'll roll up at a different place every day of the week, right? In the welfare parking lot one day of the week, in the homeless shelter parking lot one day of the week, each day a different week. And it meets you there. And we also have a 5150 van. You call, you hop in. It's all cushion van. You get to talk to a therapist, work through it, see if we need to take them in or not, like crisis stabilization. And I love those because I worked in a psych hospital for years where we took in the 5150s and saw people in extreme psychiatric distress. And so um always so I've worked with so much of the unhomed population, or the population that's has addiction issues, and how they follow up with mental health care on the streets, you know, and see them through the years, right? I see them now in jail, actually. So I follow people for years, actually, because I just, uh, I see repeat offenders, repeat hospitalizations, and I try to do my job, which is I make recommendations for the court. Like this person needs conserved, right? Or I'm making APS report, CPS report, or mental health diversion recommendations, sentencing recommendations, things like that. So all of that is how I feel like I'm can make a positive impact, right? Getting people connected to services for those that need it.
Yeah, that's awesome. That's cool that California offers that. I wish that that was statewide. Like that van idea is really cool. Because I know here in Washington, like Seattle is really bad when it comes to the homeless population, and there's a lot of mentally ill homeless people I've noticed in Seattle. Like whenever I go to the airport, I notice people just walking down the street barefooted, yelling at cars, and walking down the interstate. Really, so that's cool that California offers that. I wish that was there was more services like that for people that do need mental health services because there's been so many mass shootings where people have sought help. Like I was talking about Isaac Zamora earlier, right? He went to the social services office and he had told them that he was feeling suicidal and homicidal. And what did they do? They're like, "Oh, make an appointment with me on Monday, and we'll go over. We'll start like a. We'll get you a case manager and everything." And the next day, he kills, 6 or 7 people, and now he's in prison for the rest of his life. When all he needed was mental health services at the time.
In my experience of people that I've worked with who were homicidal, meaning they actually were brought in by the police for danger to others. So, homicidal threats, attempts, statements, a combination of things. So, over the years, I've seen, you know, hundreds of homicidal individuals, even in the emergency room, right? I did 5150s. So, one of the things that I've learned is that depression is the warning sign. So they're danger to themselves also, even though they don't always say that, but like listen to them. So it's usually not that they're just danger to others or homicidal. The warning sign is they're suicidal. Once you get to the point where your life doesn't matter, neither does yours, neither does anyone else's. It just doesn't matter because they're willing to go. Like, and when you understand that, like, you got to get them to a safe place.
Yeah, mental illness is very fascinating.
Yeah. So I'm all about intervention. That's what I do in my work, intervention. And so I prefer to see an intervention. I would never underestimate the power of an effective intervention and how life changing it could be. To see, obviously, I see people after crimes, but I've also seen people before, right? And intervened in many. And that's an amazing experience to take people off the pathway to violence and then to have them follow you, connect through the years and say, thank you so much. Like, for talking me out of murder. Uh, that's, that's like, okay, I got to be proud of that, right?
Right, right. Yeah, that's going to be an amazing accomplishment. Or even talking somebody out of suicide too. I mean, I see it all the time on TV. Like I've seen so many different body cam footages of police officers talking people down, and I think that's just amazing when people can do that.
Yeah, there was a time when I never had that skill set. And then eventually, I encountered people who were feeling those things and I didn't know what to say or do. This is before I went back to school, but I was like, wow, I got to really figure out how to respond. Like, I don't think I have all the skill set. And yeah, um, as it turns out, right? So that I, have done that professionally, like in for people in crisis and interventions. And so I think it's really rewarding work to be able to intervene. That's very powerful. But also, hey, we're here afterwards, right? To make recommendations for the court or for treatment or how to reconnect with your family. I think for many people don't realize that there is life after this. I feel like society forgets that just lock them up and they're out of sight, out of mind. But I worked with people who got out of prison on parole. In fact, I'd be waiting for them. I was their that's one of the jobs I've had was people just out of prison. Uh, I was their clinician and would get them connected to services and healthcare and, prevent them from reoffending. And most of them I worked with had committed murder or rape or violent assault just because the nature of the population I worked with. And a lot of them had served 10 years. I don't think people realize there's no registry for murder. And even many people who have raped or committed very heinous crimes, there's no registry for that. And also, even people that have committed violent sexual crimes, it doesn't mean they're registered, right? Just so society needs to be aware that they are all out there and they do get out and they're everywhere. So what we need to be prepared for that. So California did not do a good job in with their realignment of locking everyone up and then you open the door, let them all out. Like we've got problems, okay?
Mhm.
And then society just is like, well, get rid of them. We hide the homeless people. Like we don't want to look at this like this problem. And it's like, well, this has actually been brewing for quite a while now. Like if you didn't see this coming, everyone gets out. Like most people get out of prison and jail like all the time, every day. So if they weren't getting treatment, they're not improved. They're not leaving prison like, I feel so much better about my life. Like I'm, motivated. I'm going to I, so I think there's a lot of education we can do with the community about, uh, yeah, treatment in prison for one thing.
Right. Yeah. I always hear all the time from different prisoners that mental health services in prison is a joke. Like it's like I know one guy, he's a serial killer in Illinois and he always tries to see a therapist and they always deny him because they say he's a lifer and he doesn't need mental health services, that mental health services are more geared towards people that are getting out one day or something like that. And I'm just like, well, how is this guy supposed to stop from acting out on his fantasies and everything like that? Because this guy killed 5 kids, had sex with 2 of their bodies, and killed a woman, and he still has these thoughts to this day, but he can't talk to anybody about it. So I end up being his therapist sometimes for 15 minutes, maybe once a week, and he's like, how do I stop myself from acting out on staff or other inmates? And I'm like, well, you just got to do the best you can do, and he's like, well, if I can't talk to anybody, how do they expect me to, they're going to punish me for doing something when I just want to talk to somebody and tell them, what I'm going through, what I'm feeling, so on and so forth. Like his mom died last year. And I guess when his mom died, they came and told him and they locked him in a cell for a couple of days because they thought that he was going to be a nuisance or something. I'm just like, why not have a therapist come and talk to him, even though he's a lifer and he's never getting out? It doesn't seem fair, you know, to give mental health services to some prisoners and exclude others from it just because they're going to die in prison. I think that's kind of wrong.
Yeah, the prison system is broken. That is That's definitely a continuing conversation we have on this podcast as I interview people who work in prison as not just correctional officers, but forensic psychologists and all types of people and their experiences. Yeah. But I'm fascinated by the work you do. It sounds like you're genuine and heartfelt, and like good things are coming out of your conversations, like solving a cold case. I would love to be a part of solving crimes, solving problems, creating solutions. So that's my mission. It's not to glorify people that kill or commit heinous acts of violence, but I do work with people who are violent and the same people. And so it's just, yeah, I feel like you're definitely working with a lost population, like, and you're getting their stories out. And like the Mine Hunter, which is an absolutely amazing show that people should watch to understand, like the journey of trying, to start the FBI's first, behavioral science unit, right? We're trying to understand, why do these people do what they do? This is before there was the official title of a forensic psychologist, which is like the role what I do now, right? But now we kind of understand it. We get it. These conversations are important. And I talk to these people all the time too, right? And I actually learn a lot of things too. And it actually makes me better at my job. I've been working some sex crimes, and it's just very interesting. And I learn new things every day. And anyway, I'm so thankful that you were able to do the interview with me today, and I'm curious to keep communicating with you and learning more about your new podcast and like how we can collaborate.
Yeah, thank you for having me on today. I apologize. It's taken quite a bit of time to do so, but I'm glad we were able to get this done today. And like I said, in the near future, I plan on having you out on both shows, both Unforbidden Truth and Reflections from Within. So yeah, we'll definitely, stay in touch. I find what you do fascinating. I love your podcast. I'm glad I came across it. And it's definitely one of my new favorite ones, to say the least, for sure.
Oh, I just love your heart and your passion. I think you're doing great things. And I'm excited to what the future holds for you and your show. I just know it's going to take off even more and more. I just know it, right? There's so much more to come. Like, I feel like you and I are both just getting started. But I really appreciate you, and I'm excited to connect with you again and collaborate. And so thank you so much for your time today, Andrew.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for listening. For episode details and merch, check out killerpsychologistpodcast.com. And for forensic services, you can book online at psychologydr.com. That's psychologydoctor.com.